Richard and Margaret Harrison were the perfect couple in Willow Creek, with 2 children, a beautiful home, and smiles that made neighbors trust them. They looked like the family everyone wanted to be, but behind their closed doors, fear grew. Secrets festered, and one summer night, everything collapsed. By the time the truth came out, the Harrisons were no longer the town's proudest family. They were the center of the crime that shocked America. Willow Creek was the sort of place where people believed nothing bad could ever happen. Rows of neatly kept homes stretched along winding streets, each with trimmed hedges and spotless driveways. Children rode bicycles in the late afternoons, their laughter echoing through the cul-de-sacs. On weekends, neighbors grilled hamburgers waved across fences, traded recipes as if they were part of one large extended family. To newcomers, it seemed almost too perfect, as though the entire town had been staged for a commercial promising safety, community, and happiness. Yet, in that stillness, in that carefully maintained image, something sinister was waiting. The Harrison family embodied everything Willow Creek represented. Richard Harrison was a successful contractor who often boasted about the homes he had built. And Margaret, his wife, worked at a local design firm, always dressed neatly, always smiling. Their 2 teenage children attended the town's best schools, participated in sports, and volunteered at community events. To outsiders, they were a picture of success and togetherness. Even the way their lawn was manicured set them apart freshly. Cut grass, flower beds bursting with color, and a porch light that never failed to flicker on right as the sun went down. People pointed to the Harrison home as an example of the stability and security Willow Creek promised its residents, but beneath the calm surface of suburban life, eyes stirred in small, almost invisible ways. A few neighbors whispered about strange events during the late hours. On more than one occasion, people reported hearing unusual noises echoing down the quiet street. Some said it sounded like muffled shouting, while others insisted it was nothing more than a dog barking at the night air. A few even swore they had glimpsed a shadow moving between the Harrison home and the woods beyond the cul-de-sac. These observations were passed around quietly, often dismissed with nervous laughter. After all, who wanted to disturb the fragile? Illusion of perfection? Strangeness wasn't confined to sounds and shadows. There were small details that made some uneasy but never enough to raise alarm. The Harrisons' garbage cans were sometimes set out at odd hours, heavy with bags that clinked or sloshed when dragged to the curb. Delivery trucks came to the house late at night, dropping packages that were quickly whisked inside. Margaret's smile, once radiant, had begun to look strained in recent months, as though she was performing a role rather than living a life. Richard, who had once been the center of neighborhood gatherings, grew more withdrawn, his gaze sharper, colder, and less patient with idle chatter. Even so, the image of Willow Creek and the Harrison family held strong. People told themselves every neighborhood had its quirks. Every family had its secrets. Truth was easier to ignore than to confront. The town had built its reputation on security, and that reputation was worth protecting. Residents carried on with their routines, convincing themselves that the little oddities were nothing more than the product of overactive imaginations. Then came the summer morning when the illusion cracked. The quiet suburban street, where mailboxes gleamed and children chased each other barefoot, was suddenly flooded with police cars. The flashing lights shattered the calm that had defined Willow Creek for so long. Officers moved quickly, speaking in hushed tones, while neighbors gathered at their windows, peeking through blinds, their hearts pounding. Something had happened inside the Harrison home. Something terrible enough to draw the kind of attention this neighborhood had never seen. Before in that moment, Willow Creek's perfect image began to unravel. The town that had once seemed untouched by crime would soon be known across the country for a story so shocking, so horrifying that no one who lived there would ever look at their quiet streets the same way again. And it all began with the family. Everyone thought they knew best the Harrisons, the pride of the neighborhood, the ones who seemed incapable of hiding anything at all. It started with something so small that most people would have brushed it aside. One of the Harrison children, Emily, failed to show up at school. Teachers assumed she was sick, perhaps down with the flu. Friends texted her, but received no reply, which wasn't unusual for a teenager who might have wanted a break from social media. When the following day came and went with no sign of Emily, her absence began to weigh heavier on those who noticed. By the third day, the worry spread beyond the school. Margaret Harrison, who never missed a day at her design firm, failed to appear for work. Her boss tried calling, but the phone rang endlessly, never reaching a voicemail. Neighbors noticed the Harrison car sitting in the driveway unmoved, while curtains that usually let in the morning light were drawn tightly shut. At first, people tried to reason with themselves. Maybe the family had taken a sudden trip. Perhaps there had been an emergency with relatives. But as days passed, unease grew into suspicion. Neighbors, who once looked to the Harrison home as a symbol of order, began exchanging concerned glances. On the sidewalks, whispers spread at the grocery store and coffee shop. Something wasn't right. The police were finally contacted, and a missing persons report was filed. Officers arrived at the Harrison home in the early afternoon, their presence turning heads throughout the neighborhood. The house appeared normal at first glance, its exterior just as pristine as always. The lawn was neatly trimmed, the porch swept clean. But as the officers knocked on the door and received no response, the unsettling silence inside seemed to amplify. They gained entry, and what they discovered chilled them. The interior was spotless, unnaturally so. Surfaces gleamed, not a speck of dust visible. It was as if someone had scoured the place from top to bottom. But the perfection felt wrong, forced, stripped of the warmth that usually filled a family home. There were no shoes by the door, no jackets on hooks, no books or school bags casually left out. Family photographs that once decorated the walls were gone, leaving pale rectangles where the frames had hung. Personal belongings were missing in strange ways, clothes removed from closets, drawers emptied, and yet other items like furniture remained untouched. The most disturbing detail was in the garage. An expensive Persian rug known to have been displayed in the living room had been rolled tightly and shoved awkwardly into a corner. Its edges were frayed, and a faint metallic smell lingered in the air around it. Even more unsettling was the unmistakable odor of bleach, clinging to the walls, the floor, and the very air itself. To the officers, it was not simply the smell of cleaning. It was the smell of concealment. As word spread that the Harrison home was under police investigation, neighbors gathered quietly at their windows, too afraid to step outside. They whispered about the possibility of a break-in, or perhaps a robbery gone wrong. But those who had lived on the street long enough sensed something darker. The Harrisons had not vanished without reason. Something deliberate had happened within those walls. Something carefully staged to erase the truth. Detectives began piecing together the timeline. Emily's last confirmed sighting had been 4 days earlier, leaving school with her brother. Margaret had last been seen leaving work that same evening, smiling politely as she said goodbye to her colleagues. After that, no one could confirm seeing any member of the Harrison family. Bank accounts sat untouched, credit cards unused. No calls, no emails, no social media posts. It was as though the entire family had been swallowed whole, leaving behind only the shell of their home. Investigators treated the house as a crime scene, collecting samples and photographing every inch. But the absence of life inside was louder than any evidence they could find. A once vibrant family home had been reduced to a stage, polished and empty, as if someone had been desperate to wipe it clean of the past. The neighbors, who once dismissed their unease, now realized the truth they had ignored for too long. Something terrible had happened in Willow Creek, and the Harrisons were at the center of it, as investigators pressed deeper into the strange silence of the Harrison home. The flawless exterior of the family's life began to crack wide open. What had once seemed like a picture-perfect household quickly revealed threads of secrecy and control, threads that would lead to the darkest corners of their world. At first glance, the Harrisons had always appeared financially comfortable, but bank records told another story. Credit cards were maxed out, loans had been taken under different names, and payments were long overdue. The successful contractor and his professional wife were drowning in debt, yet they had managed to keep the truth carefully hidden from their neighbors. Friends and colleagues who were interviewed recalled small details that suddenly seemed to matter. Margaret had been quieter at work in recent months, her energy drained, her smile practiced rather than genuine. Some said she looked tired, her eyes darting toward the clock as if counting down the hours until she could escape. Others remembered how she often left in a hurry, making vague excuses about errands or family matters. At the time, no one pressed her, but now, in the shadow of her disappearance, those moments looked like red flags. The deeper investigators searched, the more they uncovered pieces of a life that did not fit the polished suburban image. Buried in the basement, behind a locked door that had been almost overlooked, they found a hidden room. The space was soundproofed, its walls padded with insulation and covered by heavy boards. Inside was a desk littered with scattered papers, and beside it, a box filled with journals. The room smelled of damp wood and secrecy, a space clearly never meant for guests. The journals belonged to Margaret. Her neat handwriting filled page after page, documenting private fears and confessions. She wrote of sleepless nights, of growing suspicion toward Richard, and of the unease that consumed her whenever she heard his late-night phone calls. She described following him once, against her better judgment, and discovering that he had driven to the edge of town, meeting strangers in abandoned lots. Margaret did not know exactly what he was involved in, but she was certain it was dangerous. She hinted at money being exchanged, at packages being handed off, and at the way Richard's behavior changed when confronted. The tone of her writing grew increasingly frantic as the weeks went by. The final entries carried a sense of dread. Margaret wrote that she feared for her safety and, worse, for the safety of her children. She mentioned overhearing Richard speak in a voice she barely recognized, cold and commanding, as if he was a different man entirely. Her last journal entry ended abruptly, mid-sentence, as if she had been interrupted. For investigators, the discovery of those journals shifted everything. What had looked like a disappearance began to resemble a cover-up, the work of someone determined to silence the only person who knew too much. Neighbors who had once admired Richard's confidence now recalled moments that unsettled them. His sudden temper when questioned, his dismissive smirk when people teased him about working late, his tendency to avoid eye contact when the topic of finances arose. None of it seemed unusual at the time, but pieced together, it painted a picture of a man guarding a secret life. The hidden room became the centerpiece of the investigation. The walls bore faint marks where shelves had once stood, as if items had been hastily removed. Dust outlined missing objects on the desk, suggesting that someone had taken evidence before police arrived. It was as though Richard had known that discovery was inevitable and had tried to erase his tracks. Still, the journals remained, an unshakable testimony to Margaret's fear and her belief that her husband was capable of something terrible. The perfect image of the Harrison family was gone. In its place stood a chilling possibility that behind the manicured lawn and polite smiles, Richard Harrison had built a world of lies and intimidation, one that his wife had begun to expose. If she had uncovered the truth, it might explain why she and her children had vanished without a trace. What no one yet realized was just how deep the deception went, or how close the investigators were to uncovering the final pieces of the puzzle that would expose the Harrisons. Darkest secret, the discovery of Margaret's journals gave investigators the first glimpse into the darkness hidden within the Harrison household. But it was still not enough to explain what had happened to her or her children. Forensic teams returned to the home again and again, determined to uncover every trace that had been so carefully scrubbed away. At first, the house appeared to resist them, as if Richard's efforts to erase the truth had worked. Then came the break that shifted the investigation from speculation to certainty. In the garage, beneath layers of freshly poured cement, faint discolorations caught the attention of a forensic technician. The floor had been patched, the concrete smoother in one spot than the rest. Samples were taken, and what they revealed confirmed the team's worst fears. Microscopic traces of blood were embedded in the concrete, small fragments invisible too. The eye, but undeniable under laboratory analysis. DNA matched the blood to Margaret Harrison. It was the first concrete evidence that what happened inside that home was not a simple disappearance. It was a crime. The discovery electrified the investigation. Detectives began scrutinizing every move Richard had made in the days before his family was reported missing. Receipts surfaced from a hardware store showing purchases of cement, gloves, and heavy-duty trash bags. Surveillance footage captured Richard late at night at a gas station, his expression flat and unreadable as he filled containers with gasoline. He wasn't alone. Standing beside him was his teenage son, Ethan, helping to load cleaning supplies into the trunk of the family car. The possibility that father and son had acted together shook investigators. It added a layer of horror no one was prepared for. This wasn't just the story of a controlling husband and a terrified wife. It was a story of influence, manipulation, and betrayal that reached into the very fabric of a family. The community that once admired the Harrisons struggled to comprehend how a father could involve his own child in covering up a crime. The same neighbors who had praised Richard for his devotion now whispered about his coldness, remembering moments that had seemed insignificant but now reeked of menace. Search warrants expanded the scope of the case. Richard's car was impounded, and inside the trunk investigators found a shovel, its blade still carrying traces of soil and embedded fibers. Further testing revealed hair caught in the edges, hair consistent with Margaret's. The shovel, combined with the cement in the garage and the journals in the basement, created a picture that no one could ignore. Yet the bodies of Margaret and the children remained missing, leaving the most haunting questions unanswered. Interviews with Ethan's classmates painted a troubling portrait of the teenager. Once outgoing and cheerful, he had grown distant in recent months, his behavior mirroring his father's rigid demeanor. Stopped attending social events, withdrew from sports, and was often seen late at night walking aimlessly through the neighborhood. Some classmates mentioned that he seemed afraid to speak about his family at all. Others noted his sudden interest in working alongside his father, as if he was being pulled into a role he had not chosen. The investigation reached its breaking point when surveillance footage revealed Ethan and Richard together once again, this time purchasing large quantities of bleach and industrial-strength cleaning agents. The timestamp matched perfectly with the days following Margaret's disappearance. There was no longer room for doubt. Richard had not acted alone, and his teenage son had become part of the cover-up. Whether Ethan participated willingly or out of fear remained unclear, but his involvement transformed the case from tragic to unthinkable. The evidence built against Richard was overwhelming, yet he showed no signs of panic. He continued to present himself as calm, almost indifferent, when confronted with questions. To some investigators, it felt as though he had rehearsed this role for years, preparing himself for the moment he would need to face suspicion. But his son, younger and far less practiced in deception, was beginning to unravel. Small cracks showed in Ethan's composure during questioning at school. His answers wavered, his hands trembled, and he avoided eye contact. It was only a matter of time before the weight of what he knew would push him to reveal the truth. The investigation had begun with whispers of a missing family, but it had grown into something far darker. Behind the closed doors of a beautiful suburban home, a father and son had crossed a line that shocked not only their neighbors, but eventually the entire nation. The only question that remained was how long they could hold on to their carefully constructed lies before the truth finally tore them apart. The weight of the investigation pressed hardest when detectives finally decided to confront Richard Harrison directly. He sat across from them in the stark interview room, his posture steady, his face unreadable. He denied everything with a calm certainty, insisting that his wife and children had left on their own. No anger, no pleading, just a cold insistence that he was as lost as anyone else. For a moment it almost felt convincing, but the evidence told a different story. The bleach, the concrete stains, the shovel, and Margaret's journals all spoke louder than his carefully chosen words. It was not Richard who broke the silence, but his son. Ethan's composure faltered under questioning, his carefully rehearsed answers collapsing into stammers and long pauses. Detectives noticed the way he avoided his father's gaze, as if the man's presence still carried too much control over him. When separated from Richard, Ethan finally confessed, his voice trembling as he revealed the truth that no one wanted to hear. Margaret had discovered Richard's dealings weeks before her disappearance. She had grown suspicious of the late-night meetings and the financial irregularities. She confronted him with what she knew. According to Ethan, Richard admitted to being involved in illegal trades. Deals carried out in the shadows of abandoned warehouses and empty lots on the edge of town. Margaret threatened to expose him, to leave and take the children with her. That threat became the breaking point. Richard convinced Ethan that if she spoke out, their lives would be ruined. He twisted the truth, telling his son that Margaret's actions would destroy the family, that she had turned against them. On the night of her disappearance, the argument spiraled out of control. Ethan described the sound of shouting, the crash of something breaking, and then silence. He admitted that his father turned to him, demanding help. Terrified and desperate for approval, Ethan followed instructions he did not fully understand. He helped move the rolled-up rug, helped purchase cleaning supplies, and stood silently as his father poured bleach until the smell burned their throats. 8. He never said he had witnessed the final act, but his words left no doubt that he had been. Part of the cover-up that followed, the confession shattered the illusion of Willow Creek. Neighbors who once waved to the D. Harrisons from across manicured lawns struggled to reconcile the image of the polite family with the horror of what had taken place. Parents who once allowed their children to play freely on the street now called them inside before dusk. Neighborhood's perfect facade was gone, replaced with suspicion and fear. National media descended on the town, labeling it a crime that shocked America. News crews lined the quiet streets. Their cameras pointed at the once-admired Harrison home, now a hollow shell behind police tape. Commentators debated endlessly how a respected father could involve his own child in such darkness. It was not just about murder, it was about betrayal, control, and the terrifying possibility that evil could hide behind the most ordinary of faces. Richard Harrison was charged with murder, while Ethan was taken into custody as an accomplice. The courtroom would later become a place of grim fascination, with every detail of the case dissected for the public. Yet, beyond the headlines and the broadcasts, the haunting reality remained. Margaret had tried to speak out, and in doing so, had uncovered secrets too dangerous for her to survive. The Harrison house was eventually abandoned, left to decay under the weight of its history. Windows grew dusty, weeds overtook the once pristine lawn, and the neighborhood avoided walking past it after dark. It stood as a monument to everything Willow Creek had tried to deny, that perfection was only an illusion, and beneath it could lurk unimaginable darkness. For those who lived there, the story never truly ended. The crime had taken more than one life. It had stolen the innocence of an entire community. What remained was a quiet reminder that behind every curtain, every locked door, and every polite smile, there might be secrets waiting to surface. And when they do, they can shatter not just a family, but the trust of a nation watching in disbelief.